Welcome again, children, to part 2 of today's video. I hope your register and pen are close by. Make sure to use them to note down important points. In this video, we will be doing more of recap and review of what we've done so far. In the beginning of our chapter Self and Personality, which is chapter 2 in your textbook, we started by talking about the concept of self. We spoke about personal and social identity. Personal, in which how we identify ourselves, and social, in which we talk about how we identify ourselves in relation to society. We spoke about self as something to which something is done and which does something itself. So the self as a subject and as an object. We also spoke about the personal self and the social self. Then we moved on to talk about the cognitive and behavioral aspects of self. Within this, we spoke about the self concept, which involves our perception about ourselves and the ideas that we hold about our competencies and attributes. We spoke about self esteem, which is our judgment about our own value or worth. We talked about self efficacy, which involves how much we believe we have the ability or behavior required by the situations around us. Then we did self regulation, which talks about our ability to organize and monitor, or in short, regulate our own behavior. Then we go on to talk about the concept of culture and self. Here we looked at two views: the individualistic view, which is characteristic of the Western culture, and the collectivistic view, which is characterized in the Indian culture. The difference between both is that in the individualistic view, there's a clear distinction between the self and the other, or the individual and the group. In the collectivistic view, on the other hand, this boundary between the self and the other keeps changing or shifting. After covering the concept of self, we looked at the concept of personality. We talked about the definition of personality, which is the typical ways in which individuals behave or respond to different situations. We looked at the features of personality, how it has both physical and psychological components. Its expression is unique in terms of the behavior of a given individual. Its main features do not easily change with time, but we also saw that it is dynamic in the sense that depending on external situational demands or internal demands, it might change. And then we went on to look at major approaches to the study of personality. Under the major approaches to the study of personality, we first looked at the type approaches. The type approaches classify personality in terms of broad patterns in individuals' observed behavior characteristics. Under the type approaches, we have majorly the four personality types given by Hippocrates, which is sanguine, phlegmatic, melancholic, and choleric. The divisions given by the Charak Samhita, which is a treatise on Ayurveda, which classifies people into the categories of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha on the basis of three humoral elements called Tridosha, and also in terms of three gunas, which is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. We looked at the personality types given by Sheldon, which is endomorphic, mesomorphic, and ectomorphic. We also looked at how Jung classified people into introverts and extroverts. And lastly, we looked at how Friedman and Rosenman the concept of type A and type B personalities. The type C personality was added on by Morris, and later on, there was also a type D personality which was suggested. We also saw that these typologies are too simple to classify human personality, and human personality is much more complex. We then moved on to look at the trait approaches, in which the understanding of personality focuses on specific psychological attributes in which individuals differ in consistent and stable ways. We said that they try to discover the building blocks of personality. Traits are relatively stable over time. They are generally consistent across situations, and their strengths and combinations vary across individuals. In the trait approach, we have Alport's trait theory, in which we looked at the concepts of cardinal, central, and secondary traits. We looked at Raymond Cattell's personality factors, which he came about using the statistical technique called factor analysis. He came up with source and surface traits and also developed the 16 personality factor questionnaire. We then looked at Ising's theory of personality. He divided the personality traits into dimensions like neuroticism versus emotional stability, extroversion versus introversion, and later on he proposed a third dimension, which is psychoticism versus sociability. He also developed the Ising's personality questionnaire, which we will be doing for our practicals. Lastly, we looked at the 5-factor model of personality given by Costa and McRae, which includes factors like openness to experience, extraversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, and conscientiousness. Then we moved on and we looked at the psychodynamic approach, under which we spoke about levels of consciousness, structure of personality, ego defense mechanisms, and the stages of personality development as given by Freud. We looked at post-Freudian approaches, which was developed by theorists who were disciples of Freud but broke off from the original school of thought. We looked at Carl Jung, his analytical psychology, collective unconscious. We looked at Karen Horney, who talked about disturbed interpersonal relationship and basic anxiety. We looked at Alfred Adler and his individual psychology. We also looked at Eric Fromm and Erik Erikson. We moved on to look at the criticisms of the psychodynamic approach. We then did the behavioral approach, in which the structural unit of personality is the response, and behaviors are understood in terms of the learning of stimulus-response connections. We recalled the theories of learning which we did in class 11. We moved on to the cultural approach, where we looked at the role of culture in development of various personality or behavioral qualities. Lastly, we looked at the humanistic approach, majorly contributed to by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, who talked about the idea of a fully functioning person or the attainment of self-actualization as given by Maslow. Thank you for listening, children. So far, We've covered 3/4 of our self and personality chapter. In day 7's video class, we will be looking at the assessment to personality. Please review your lesson before you join in tomorrow.